What happens when the best day of your life becomes the worst for Charlotte? Sterling, the sterile white walls of a hospital delivery room, were supposed to be the backdrop for the miracle of childbirth. Instead, they became a prison. While she endured the agonizing pains of labor, bringing their son into the world, her millionaire husband Donovan was living his best life. And he wasn't just absent. He was broadcasting his betrayal to their millions of followers. A single Instagram post, a clink of champagne glasses with his mistress on a private jet, shattered her world. But the real explosion was yet to come, not on social media, but in a quiet lawyer's office, where a secret decades in the making was about to detonate. The silence in the Greystone Manor was a living thing. It seeped from the cold marble floors, clung to the velvet draperies that were always drawn and pooled in the cavernous spaces between the meticulously chosen antiques. For Charlotte Sterling, 9 months pregnant, and feeling as large and unwieldy as the grand piano in the foyer, the silence was a constant companion, a more faithful partner than her husband had been for the last year. Donovan Sterling loved things that were grand. Grand gestures, grand properties, grand profits. He had built Sterling Enterprises from a plucky tech startup into a sprawling digital media empire. He was a titan of the new age, a self-made man whose face graced the covers of business magazines. He had given Charlotte this house, this life of effortless luxury, as a grand gesture of his love. But lately, the gilded cage felt more like a cage than gilded. Her days followed a quiet, prescribed rhythm. Prenatal yoga in the home gym, consultations with the nutritionist, overseeing the final touches on the nursery, a serene space of soft grey and pale yellow, waiting for its small occupant. She'd trace the hand-painted giraffes on the wall, her hand resting on the tight drum of her stomach, and whisper to the baby inside. "It's just you and me for now, little one. But Daddy's just very busy. He's building our future." She tried to believe it. She really did. But the evidence was mounting small cracks in the perfect facade of their life. The late nights he swore were board meetings. The hushed, clipped phone calls he'd take on the terrace, his back turned to her. The faint, unfamiliar scent of a floral perfume clinging to his suit jacket one evening, a scent too sweet and modern for her own classic Chanel No. 5. When she'd asked, he'd laughed it off. "Must have been someone at the office, sweetheart. You know how it is." She didn't know. She was no longer invited to the glittering galas and corporate dinners. "It's too much for you in your condition," he'd say, his tone a perfect blend of concern and dismissal. "You need to rest. For the baby." Tonight the silence was heavier than usual. A storm was brewing outside, the wind rattling the leaded glass windows. Donovan was supposed to be home hours ago. He was flying back from a critical merger negotiation in Chicago. He'd promised he wouldn't miss the birth for anything. Their son, their heir, was due any day. Charlotte sat on the edge of their enormous bed, a single lamp casting a warm glow on her swollen ankles. She scrolled through her phone, a pang of loneliness hitting her, as she saw photos of her friends with their husbands, their hands intertwined. She opened Donovan's Instagram. His feed was a curated masterpiece of success, him ringing the bell at the stock exchange, him shaking hands with politicians, him posing by his latest sports car. The last photo was from 2 days ago, a skyline shot of Chicago, with the caption, "Closing deals, building empires, Sterling." Nearly 1 million likes. Suddenly, a sharp, searing pain shot through her lower back, wrapping around her abdomen like a band of steel. She gasped, dropping the phone on the plush carpet. She waited, breathing through her nose, her heart hammering against her ribs. Minutes passed. Then another wave, stronger this time. This was it. There was no mistaking it. Her hands trembled as she dialed Donovan's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times before going to his voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Donovan Sterling. Leave a message." She tried again. Voicemail. Panic began to curdle in her stomach. He always answered. Always. She sent a frantic text. "The baby is coming. It's happening now. Call me." The 3 little dots appeared, indicating he was typing. Relief washed over her. Then the reply came. "Can't talk. In the final stages of the deal. The lawyers are here." "This is the billion-dollar moment, Char." "Hold on. I'll be there as soon as I can." "Hold on," she whispered to the empty room. "Hold on." Another contraction seized her, more powerful than the last. She cried out, doubling over. This wasn't a slow progression. It was a freight train. She knew with a primal certainty that she didn't have hours. The billion-dollar moment. Their son's birth reduced to an inconvenience standing in the way of a deal. Tears of pain and fury streamed down her face. She was alone. Utterly and completely alone in their grand, silent mansion. With shaking fingers, she scrolled through her contacts, past her mother, who lived halfway across the country, past the driver she could call. She needed a friend. She pressed the name Hannah. Hannah, her college roommate, a down-to-earth art teacher, who always saw through Donovan's polished veneer, answered on the first ring. "Hey, you okay?" "Hannah." Charlotte sobbed, the word catching in her throat. "My water just broke. The contractions they're so strong. And Donovan, he's not answering." There was no judgment in Hannah's voice, only immediate, focused action. "Okay, Charlie, breathe. I'm 5 minutes away. I'm leaving now. Have you called the doctor?" "No. I called him first." Charlotte admitted the shame of it burning her throat. "Of course you did," Hannah said softly. "Call the doctor, then unlock the front door. I'll be there before you hang up. We'll do this. You and me." As Charlotte slid her phone back into her hospital bag, another text from Donovan buzzed on the nightstand. She couldn't resist looking. "Don't worry. I've already arranged for the top security suite at the hospital. Just tell them my name. Spared no expense for my boy." He hadn't even asked if it was a boy. He'd just assumed. Another grand gesture, an empty, meaningless display. Spared no expense except the one thing that mattered himself. The pain that followed had nothing to do with labor. It was the agony of a heartbreaking piece by gilded piece. The maternity ward at Lenox Hill was exactly as Donovan had arranged, a private suite that looked more like a 5-star hotel room than a hospital room. It had a separate sitting area, a fully stocked minibar, which seemed a cruel joke at the moment, and sweeping views of the city. But the luxury was lost on Charlotte. To her, the beeping of the fetal heart monitor was an incessant countdown, and the antiseptic smell a constant reminder of her stark reality. Hannah was a whirlwind of calm efficiency. She coached Charlotte through her breathing, wiped her brow with a cool cloth, and ran interference with the nurses, translating Charlotte's pained moans into coherent updates. For 6 hours they were a team. For 6 hours Charlotte tried to push Donovan from her mind, focusing only on the monumental task at hand. She tried to conjure his face, to imagine him holding her hand, but the image was blurry, replaced by the cold blue light of his text messages. "He's a fool, Charlie," Hannah murmured during a brief lull between contractions, her voice laced with a fury Charlotte was too exhausted to feel. "A world-class pedigreed fool. He's just driven," Charlotte whispered, the defense sounding weak even to her own ears. "He's driving right over you," Hannah retorted, not unkindly. As the labor intensified, the doctor, a kind woman named Dr. Albright, grew concerned. Your blood pressure is spiking, Charlotte. The baby is showing some signs of distress. We need you to try and relax. Relax. The word was an absurdity. How could she relax when every fiber of her being was being torn apart, physically and emotionally? She felt like a ship being ripped from its moorings in a hurricane. She closed her eyes, trying to find a calm place, but all she saw was the echo of her empty mansion. It was during a particularly grueling contraction, when Charlotte's knuckles were white from gripping the bedrail, that Hannah pulled out her phone, intending to text her own husband a quick update. Idly, she opened Instagram to quiet the noise in her own mind. And then she froze. Her face went pale, her jaw slack. She stared at the screen, her thumb hovering motionless. "Hun, what is it?" Charlotte panted, the contraction receding. "Is it bad news?" Hannah looked up, her eyes wide, with a horror so profound it transcended anger. She didn't know what to do. To show her would be a cruelty of unimaginable proportions, but to hide it felt like a different kind of betrayal. "Hannah, you're scaring me." "What is on your phone?" Charlotte's voice was sharper now, laced with a new kind of fear. Wordlessly, Hannah turned the phone around. The screen burned itself into Charlotte's memory, a high-definition photograph of her personal hell. It was a post from an account she vaguely recognized, a notorious influencer and model named Crystal Vixen. The photo was taken inside a private jet, the creamy leather seats and polished wood gleaming. In the center of the frame was Donovan. He wasn't wearing the suit he'd supposedly worn to his Chicago meeting. He was in a casual, expensive-looking linen shirt, his arm wrapped possessively around Crystal's tiny waist. Crystal, stunning and impossibly slender, was pouting at the camera, holding up a flute of champagne. Donovan was holding a matching flute, a triumphant, almost smug grin on his face. But it was the caption that delivered the killing blow. "To new beginnings with my one and only. He knows how to treat his queen." Cabo bound, the post was time-stamped 1 hour ago. While she was here screaming in agony, he was on a private jet to Mexico. With her. He wasn't closing a $1 billion deal. He was celebrating a new beginning. A sound escaped Charlotte's throat, a raw, wounded cry that was part grief, part rage. It was the sound of a universe collapsing. The heart monitor beside her bed began to shriek its rhythmic beep, turning into a frantic, high-pitched alarm. "What's happening?" Dr. Albright rushed in, followed by 2 nurses. "Get that phone out of here," the doctor commanded, seeing the source of the distress. But the damage was done. The image was seared onto the back of Charlotte's eyelids. The lie wasn't just that he was absent. The lie was everything. Their entire life. The concern for her health, the empire he was building for them, the promises whispered in the dark. All of it a sham. "Charlotte, look at me," Dr. Albright said, her voice firm but gentle. "Forget him. He is not here. You are here. Your baby is here. And he needs you right now. You need to focus. You need to push." Something inside Charlotte snapped. The hurt, the betrayal, the soul-crushing humiliation, it didn't vanish. It crystallized. It morphed from a debilitating poison into a volatile, high-octane fuel. He wanted to build an empire. She was about to bring forth the only legacy that would ever truly matter. And she would do it alone. Her pain became power. Her sorrow became strength. With a primal roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the hospital, she bore down, channeling every ounce of her shattered heart into the physical act of creation. She wasn't just pushing a baby into the world. She was pushing Donovan Sterling out of her soul. And in that moment, under the harsh fluorescent lights, surrounded by the cacophony of medical machinery and the ghost of a digital betrayal, Samuel Sterling was born. He was small, perfect, and screaming his lungs out. As the nurse placed him on Charlotte's chest, his tiny, wrinkled body warm against her skin, her tears finally came. They weren't tears of joy or sorrow or anger. They were tears of pure, unadulterated transformation. The Charlotte Sterling who had walked into this hospital was gone. In her place was a mother, and a woman who would never, ever be a fool again. The 2 days following Samuel's birth were a blur of muted chaos. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, offering lactation advice, and cooing over the baby. Hannah remained a steadfast presence, fielding calls from Charlotte's worried parents, and intercepting the lavish, ostentatious flower arrangements that began arriving from Donovan's office, each with a generic pre-printed card. "Congratulations on our beautiful boy." Charlotte instructed the nurses to donate them to the general ward. She didn't want them. She didn't want anything that had been touched by his money or his lies. She spent the hours in a quiet, focused cocoon with her son. She memorized the shape of his ears, the tiny whirl of dark hair on his head, the way his little hand curled instinctively around her finger. Every time she looked at him, a fierce, protective love surged through her, so potent it left her breathless. This tiny, helpless human was her world now. He was the anchor in her storm. Her phone had been silent. No calls or texts from Donovan since the one about the hospital suite. She knew why. He was in Cabo living out his blessed new beginning. The thought sent a shard of ice through her veins, but she refused to let it shatter her. The time for tears was over. Now was the time for strategy. On the third morning, as she was nursing Samuel in the pale sunlight streaming through the window, her phone finally buzzed. The name Donovan flashed on the screen. Hannah, who was packing Charlotte's bag for discharge, looked over. "Don't answer it." "No," Charlotte said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I have to. Just once." She shifted Samuel into the crook of her other arm and answered, putting the phone on speaker. "Charlotte. Hey, babe." His voice was breezy, jovial, the voice of a man without a care in the world. "Sorry, I've been completely off the grid. This merger was an absolute beast. We're talking round-the-clock sessions. Just landed back in New York. I'm on my way to the hospital now. So any news? Did our little champ decide to make his debut?" The casual, blatant lie was so audacious it was almost impressive. He hadn't even bothered to check if she'd had the baby. He just assumed his timeline was the only one that mattered. Hannah's face was a mask of contempt. Charlotte, however, felt a strange, chilling calm settle over her. "Yes, Donovan," she said, her tone devoid of any emotion. "I had the baby 2 days ago." There was a brief pause on the other end. 2 days, wow. That's fantastic. A boy, right? I knew it. What a trooper, see. I told you could handle it. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I can't wait to see my son." "My son." The possessiveness in his voice grated on her last nerve. "Don't," she said. The line went quiet again. "Don't what?" "Don't be 20 minutes. I can try to get there. Faster. Traffic is just—" "No, Donovan." She interrupted, her voice as cold and sharp as surgical steel. "Don't come to the hospital. Don't come to the house. Don't try to see me, and don't try to see him." The silence on the other end of the line was now heavy, confused. "What are you talking about, Char? Are you okay? Are the hormones getting to you?" The nurses said postpartum can be rough. "I am perfectly fine," she stated. "In fact, I don't think I've ever seen things more clearly in my entire life. I saw your Instagram post, Donovan. Or rather, I saw crystals." The silence that followed was different. It wasn't confusion. It was the dead, heavy silence of a man caught. "Ah," was all he managed. "Yes." "Ah," Charlotte mimicked. "While I was in labor, you were flying to Cabo with her to celebrate your new beginning. So go. Enjoy it. But that new beginning will not include me or my son." "Charlotte, you're overreacting," he finally stammered, his voice shifting from breezy to defensive. "It was a stupid mistake, a moment of weakness. It meant nothing. You know the pressures I'm under, this company, our future." "Stop," she said, the single word carrying so much weight it seemed to suck the air from the room. "Just stop talking. I have only one more thing to say to you. If you wish to have any further communication regarding this matter, you can direct it to my lawyer." "Your lawyer?" He scoffed, a hint of his old arrogance returning. "Don't be ridiculous. We'll talk about this when I get there. We are not getting lawyers involved. We have a prenup for a reason. I have a son for a reason, Donovan, and I will protect him. Goodbye." She ended the call, her finger pressing the screen with a finality that resonated deep in her bones. She looked down at Samuel, who had fallen asleep at her breast, his tiny mouth slightly agape. A fierce, almost primal wave of love washed over her. "Okay," Hannah said, breaking the silence, her eyes shining with admiration. "That was the most badass thing I have ever witnessed." Charlotte gave a weak, watery smile. "I feel like I'm going to throw up, but I also feel free." "What lawyer are you going to call?" Hannah asked gently. "You need a shark, Charlie. A great white." Charlotte's mind went back to a conversation years ago before the wedding. Her father, a man of old money and deep-seated skepticism, had sat her down. He'd liked Donovan's ambition, but distrusted his flashiness. "I hope I'm wrong about him, sweetheart," he'd said. "But hope is not a strategy. If the worst ever happens, this is the name you call. You don't call me, you don't call your mother. You call her. She handled your grandfather's most contentious estate battle. She doesn't just win, she dismantles. He had written a name and number on a piece of his personal letterhead and sealed it in an envelope which Charlotte had tucked away in a safe deposit box. "I know exactly who to call," Charlotte said, her resolve hardening. "Fetch me my bag. It's time to make the second most important call of my life." She dialed the number from memory. A crisp, professional voice answered. "Finch and Associates." "My name is Charlotte Sterling," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I need to speak with Miss Rosalind Finch. It's a personal matter, a divorce." There was a pause, and then the receptionist said, "One moment, Mrs. Sterling." A few seconds later, a new voice came on the line. It was calm, measured, and radiated an unnerving intelligence. "This is Rosalind Finch. How can I help you, Mrs. Sterling?" Charlotte took a deep breath and began to tell her story. She left nothing out: the lonely pregnancy, the dismissive texts, the agonizing labor, and the final brutal betrayal broadcast on Instagram for the world to see. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. Charlotte worried she had said too much, that she sounded hysterical. But when Ms. Finch spoke, her voice was not sympathetic. It was tactical. "He posted it on a public social media platform?" Ms. Finch asked. "Yes," Charlotte confirmed. "And you have a screenshot of this post with the caption and the timestamp. My friend Hannah has it." "Excellent." Ms. Finch said, a hint of something that sounded like satisfaction in her tone. "Men with big egos often make big mistakes. This is a very big one. Mrs. Sterling, enjoy these first few days with your son. Do not engage with your husband. Do not respond to his texts, emails, or calls. Block his number if you have to. Let him panic. My office will have a courier at the hospital within the hour to collect your signature on a retainer and a formal separation notice. We'll have him served by the end of the day. He chose to make his private life public. We will simply respond in the appropriate legal forum." "He mentioned our prenup," Charlotte said quietly. He said it was ironclad. Rosalind Finch actually chuckled. It was a dry, sharp sound. Oh, I do love it when they call them ironclad. It's always so satisfying to show them where the rust is. Let me worry about the prenup, Mrs. Sterling. You just worry about your son. When Charlotte hung up the phone, the world felt different. The future was terrifying and uncertain, but for the first time in a very long time, it felt like it was hers to write. Donovan Sterling arrived at Greystone Manor, not with a whimper, but with a bang. He stormed through the front doors. He had been locked out of his own emergency locksmith, in tow, his face a thunderous mask of indignation. He had expected to find a tearful, hysterical Charlotte, ready to be placated with apologies, and a ridiculously expensive push present. Instead, he found an empty nursery, a closet cleared of his wife's belongings, and a crisp white envelope on the marble island in the kitchen. Inside was a letter from Finch and Associates, formally notifying him that Charlotte Sterling had retained their services and was petitioning for divorce on grounds of adultery and extreme cruelty. It also included a temporary restraining order, preventing him from coming within 500 feet of Charlotte or Samuel. His fury was immediate and volcanic. He called Charlotte's phone 12 times, each call going directly to voicemail. He called Hannah, who answered only to say, "She has nothing to say to you, Donovan. Get a lawyer." Before hanging up, he did get a lawyer. He called Arthur Coleman a corporate brawler, known for his aggressive tactics and his belief that any problem could be solved with enough money and intimidation. "It's a shakedown, Don," Arthur boomed over the phone. "She's emotional postpartum. Her Barracuda lawyer is taking advantage. We'll swat them away. The prenup is a fortress. She gets the lump sum payment, stipulated a bit of child support, and that's it. She'll come crawling back when she realizes she can't afford her lifestyle without you." Reassured, Donovan adopted a stance of arrogant defiance. He allowed his PR team to leak carefully curated stories to the gossip columns, whispers of Charlotte's pre-existing emotional fragility and postpartum instability, painting him as a concerned husband trying to navigate a difficult situation. He believed it was only a matter of time before she buckled. The first preliminary meeting took place 3 weeks later in a sterile conference room at a neutral law firm. Donovan and Arthur Coleman sat on one side of a polished mahogany table. On the other side sat Rosalind Finch, her silver hair pulled back in a severe chignon, her eyes missing nothing. Charlotte was not present. Ms. Finch had insisted it wasn't necessary. Arthur began with blustering confidence. "Let's cut to the chase, Rosalind. My client is prepared to be generous, more generous than the prenuptial agreement requires in the interest of a swift and private resolution. He loves his wife and is deeply concerned for her well-being. He wants 50-50 custody of their son and is willing to offer an additional one-time payment to settle this matter amicably." Rosalind Finch listened patiently, her hands steepled in front of her. She didn't take a single note. When Arthur was finished, she slid a single sleek tablet across the table. "Before we discuss generosity," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, "let's discuss facts." On the screen was the infamous Instagram post. Then another image, a close-up of the geotag Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. This was followed by a series of documents, flight manifests for a private jet, chartered by Sterling Enterprises Hotel Folios, from a presidential suite at a luxury Cabo resort, booked in Donovan's name, credit card statements from Sterling Enterprises corporate Amex. The statements detailed thousands of dollars in charges, couples massages, high-end jewelry, from a boutique in the resort lobby, intimate dinners for two, all time-stamped during the 48 hours Charlotte was in labor and recovery. This is what the law refers to as dissipation of marital assets, Ms. Finch stated calmly. While my client was undergoing a life-threatening medical event to bring Mr. Sterling's son into the world, Mr. Sterling was using funds that are legally considered marital property to finance an adulterous affair. The jet, the hotel, the gifts, it's all here. Thousands upon thousands of dollars. While your ironclad prenup does protect Mr. Sterling's pre-marital assets and company shares, it does not protect him from fraudulent waste. We will be clawing back every single penny and then some for damages. Arthur Coleman's confident smirk faltered. This was more than just an affair. It was documented financial malfeasance. It was a crack in the fortress. That's a minor accounting issue, he blustered. A rounding error for a man of his means. To a judge, it's a pattern of behavior, Ms. Finch countered smoothly. It speaks to character. It speaks to a profound disrespect for the marital partnership. It will be very compelling when we discuss custody. Donovan, who had been silent, finally spoke, his voice tight with anger. I want to see my son. My client is the sole legal and physical custodian of the child at this time, Ms. Finch replied without looking at him. Given the circumstances of your abandonment, we do not believe you have the child's best interests at heart. We will agree to supervised visitation 1 hour a week at a court-approved facility, pending a full psychological evaluation. That's outrageous. Donovan slammed his hand on the table. What's outrageous? Ms. Finch said, her gaze finally locking onto his, is posting a picture with your mistress while your wife is in labor. Everything that follows is merely a consequence. These are our initial terms. Charlotte gets the Greystone Manor. It was purchased during the marriage and is a marital asset. She gets full legal and physical custody of Samuel. Child support will be calculated based on your true income, including all corporate perks, which my forensic accountants are currently enjoying dissecting. And finally, a punitive settlement for the dissipation of assets and the emotional distress caused by your public and humiliating affair. Arthur Coleman laughed, a hollow, forced sound. You're dreaming, Rosalind. No judge will throw out that prenup. He'll never agree to this. Rosalind Finch offered a small, knowing smile. It was a terrifying sight. Oh, he'll agree. Or he will find himself facing a situation far, far worse. She began gathering her things. You see, Mr. Coleman, you and your client are fighting a battle over a few $1 million and a house. You think this is a divorce case. It's so much more than that. You've been looking at the prenup, but you haven't been looking at the fine print on Sterling Enterprises itself. I have. She stood up, her gaze fixed on Donovan. Consider this your only offer of a graceful exit. I suggest you take it. You have 48 hours to accept. After that, the real bomb drops. She turned and walked out of the room, leaving a stunned silence and the faint, lingering scent of victory in her wake. Donovan stared at the door, a cold knot of dread tightening in his stomach for the first time. What did she mean, the fine print on his company? It was his company. He built it. It was his, wasn't it? The next 48 hours were a crucible for Donovan Sterling. His arrogance warred with a creeping, unfamiliar sense of dread. Arthur Coleman assured him it was a bluff, a standard scare tactic from a high-priced lawyer. She has nothing, Don. She's trying to rattle you into a bad deal. Donovan tried to believe him. He went through the motions, huddling with his legal team, planning their counter-offensive. But Miss Finch's words echoed in his mind. You think this is a divorce case? It's so much more than that. He lashed out. He had his PR team double down, leaking a story about Charlotte, refusing him access to his sick newborn son, a complete fabrication, to paint her as vindictive and unstable. The story got some traction, but it also had an unintended effect. It solidified Charlotte's resolve, and more importantly, it infuriated her father, William Harrington. William was a quiet, powerful man from old money Boston, the kind of wealthy that whispers instead of shouts. He had watched Donovan's rise with a wary eye and had only tolerated him for Charlotte's sake. Seeing his daughter and newborn grandson slandered in the press was the final straw. He made a single phone call to Rosalind Finch. "The gloves are off, Rosalind. End it." The 48-hour deadline passed. Donovan's team sent back a laughably low counteroffer, sticking to the original prenup terms and demanding joint custody. Rosalind Finch's office responded by requesting an emergency settlement conference, summoning them to her downtown high-rise office. The atmosphere was different this time. The air crackled with tension. Donovan and Arthur walked in still posturing, but the confidence was strained. Rosalind Finch was not alone. Seated beside her was a stern-looking older gentleman they didn't recognize. "Gentlemen, please sit," Miss Finch said. "I believe you know my client is not accepting your counteroffer. I advised you to take our deal. You chose not to. So we move to the next phase." She gestured to the man beside her. "This is Mr. Alistair Hayes, trustee of the Harrington Family Trust." Donovan frowned. The Harrington Trust, that was Charlotte's family money. It had nothing to do with him. "Before we discuss the divorce further," Ms. Finch continued, "we need to clear up a fundamental misunderstanding you seem to have, Mr. Sterling. You operate under the assumption that the wealth you are so desperately trying to protect is in fact your wealth." Arthur Coleman chuckled. "Rosalind, we have the incorporation papers. Donovan Sterling is the founder and majority shareholder of Sterling Enterprises. This is not in dispute." "Oh, but it is—" "Ms. Finch," said her voice, dropping to an almost conspiratorial whisper. She slid a thick leather-bound document across the table. It was not a divorce filing. It was a trust agreement dated 12 years ago. "Please turn to page 47, Article 9, she instructed. Donovan's hands trembled slightly as he opened the document. His own lawyer leaned in a frown, creasing his forehead. Article 9 was titled, "The Sterling Seed Capital Initiative." Ms. Finch elaborated her voice, cutting through the silence. 12 years ago, Mr. Sterling, you were an ambitious young man with a brilliant idea, but no capital. You approached your then-girlfriend Charlotte's father for a loan. Mr. Harrington, being a prudent man, declined to give you a personal loan. He also declined to invest directly. Instead, he saw an opportunity. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. The Harrington Family Trust, under the guidance of Mr. Harrington, provided the entirety of the initial $5 million seed capital to found your company. However, it was not an investment in you. It was an investment through you. The funds were disbursed from a sub-trust with my client Charlotte Harrington Sterling as the sole primary beneficiary. Donovan's blood ran cold. He remembered the meeting. William Harrington had been inscrutable, agreeing to the funding through his family office. Donovan had been so thrilled to get the money he hadn't scrutinized the mountain of paperwork his first, less experienced lawyer had approved. He thought it was just complex investor language. According to this agreement, Ms. Finch continued pressing her advantage. You, Mr. Sterling, were installed as CEO and granted a 20% equity stake for your sweat equity, along with a generous salary. The remaining 80%, the controlling interest, remained the property of the trust held for its beneficiary, Charlotte. You were, for all intents and purposes, the highly compensated manager of Charlotte's asset. This is insane, Donovan sputtered, looking at Arthur, whose face had gone chalk white as he scanned the document. I built it. The all-nighters, the deals, the strategy that was all me, and you were compensated handsomely for your labor. Mr. Hayes, the trustee, spoke for the first time, his voice a gravelly baritone. But the foundation, the ownership was never yours. It was always for Charlotte, and for her children. Then came the final devastating blow. "Please turn to page 52, Article 11, Ms. Finch said. "The Family Integrity Clause. We can call it a morality clause for simplicity." Her finger tapped the paragraph. "The clause states that the CEO's position and equity are contingent upon upholding the dignity and stability of the primary beneficiary's family unit. It specifically lists grounds for immediate termination and forfeiture of all shares and benefits. Grounds include criminal conviction, financial fraud," she paused, her eyes locking on Donovan's, "or an act of public desertion or infidelity that brings shame or public humiliation upon the beneficiary or her issue." She picked up a printed copy of Crystal Vixen's Instagram post and dropped it lightly on top of the trust agreement. "Your trip to Cabo." Ms. Finch declared the finality in her voice, like the gavel of a judge, was not just grounds for divorce. It was a direct violation of the trust agreement that underpins your entire professional existence. By posting that picture, you didn't just betray your wife, Mr. Sterling. You triggered the integrity clause. You effectively fired yourself. You forfeited your 20% stake, your salary, and your position as CEO of Sterling Enterprises. The room fell into a deathly silence. The bomb hadn't just been dropped. It had vaporized Donovan Sterling's entire world. He wasn't a millionaire fighting over a divorce settlement. He was an unemployed man sitting in an office about to be sued by the woman who he now realized had been his boss all along. The company he called his, the empire, he bragged about building the very source of his power and identity. It had never truly belonged to him. It was all built on her family's foundation, a foundation he had just dynamited with a single smug click of a camera. Arthur Coleman slowly closed the binder. He looked at his client, then at Rosalind Finch. He cleared his throat. "My client," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper, "will need a moment." The aftermath was not a storm, but a quiet, swift, and total demolition. Donovan Sterling's world dismantled itself with brutal efficiency. His lawyers confirmed that the Harrington Trust Agreement was unassailable. It was a masterclass in legal foresight, crafted by a patriarch who had planned for the worst while hoping for the best. To fight it would be to incur millions in legal fees he no longer had, with no chance of success. He signed everything. He signed the divorce papers agreeing to all of Charlotte's terms. He signed the corporate documents, relinquishing his title and forfeiting his shares in Sterling Enterprises. He signed over the keys to Greystone Manor. Within a week, he went from being a titan of industry to a man with a single severance-sized bank account and a tarnished reputation. The news of his ousting from the company he supposedly founded sent shock waves through the business world. The official story, expertly spun by a crisis management team hired by the trust, was that Mr. Sterling was stepping down to pursue new ventures, and that the board was grateful for his years of service. But the truth always has a way of seeping out. Crystal Vixen, upon learning that her king had been dethroned, and his kingdom was never his to begin with, vanished from his life as quickly as she had appeared. Her Instagram was scrubbed of any mention of him. His calls went unanswered. His fair-weather friends in business and politics suddenly became very hard to reach. Donovan was left with nothing but the echo of his own hubris. The grand empire he thought he had built was a mirage, and he was now just a man wandering in a desert of his own making. He was granted his supervised one-hour visits with Samuel, held in a sterile room with a social worker watching his every move. He would look at the baby, this small piece of a life he had so carelessly thrown away, and see not a legacy, but a monument to his own spectacular failure. Meanwhile, in the quiet, sunlit rooms of Greystone Manor, a new life was beginning. Charlotte with the full backing of the trust, and her father took her place not as a vengeful ex-wife, but as a quiet, decisive leader. She wasn't interested in running the company day to day. She had no illusions about her expertise in digital media. Instead, she became the matriarch of its future. She established a new board of directors comprised of seasoned executives and her father's most trusted financial advisors. She promoted the brilliant, unassuming woman who had been Donovan's COO for years to the role of CEO, rewarding loyalty and competence over flash and ego. Her only directive to the new leadership was to run the company with integrity, to build something lasting and honorable for her son. Her life was no longer defined by cavernous silence, but by the small, happy sounds of a baby gurgling in his crib. The velvet curtains were pulled back, letting light flood into the rooms. The oppressive museum-like quality of the mansion gave way to the comfortable clutter of a real home. Hannah was a frequent visitor, cooing over Samuel and marveling at the change in her friend. "I've never seen you look so powerful," Hannah said one afternoon, as they sat on the floor of the nursery building, a block tower that Samuel immediately knocked over with a delighted squeal. Charlotte smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile that reached her eyes. "I don't know about powerful, but I feel like myself. The person I was before, I tried to shrink myself to fit into his world." She looked out the window over the sprawling green lawns that were now truly hers and her son's. She rarely thought of Donovan anymore. He was a ghost from another life, a lesson learned in the most painful way imaginable. There was no bitterness in her heart, only a calm, steely resolve. She had not sought revenge. Revenge was a hot, messy emotion. What she had received was far more profound. It was justice. A quiet, orderly rebalancing of the scales. She picked up Samuel, holding him close, his baby powder scent filling her senses. He was her empire, her legacy, her new beginning. And it was a beginning built not on lies and betrayal, but on a foundation of unshakable love and hard-won strength. The future was hers to write, and for the first time the pages were beautifully, blissfully blank. 3 years passed. The seasons in New York turned with reliable indifference, each one washing away a little more of the past. Greystone Manor was no longer a silent monument to a broken marriage, but a home filled with the joyous chaos of a small boy. Samuel, now a boisterous 3-year-old with his mother's bright eyes and a stubborn tuft of dark hair, had a laugh that could fill every room. Charlotte had settled into her new role with a grace and competence that surprised everyone except perhaps her father and Rosalind Finch. She was not the ruthless corporate raider the business journals speculated she might become. She was the quiet, steady hand on the tiller. As the majority owner of Sterling Enterprises, she chaired the quarterly board meetings, asking incisive questions that prioritized long-term stability and employee welfare over short-term profits. The company, under its new female CEO, thrived. It became known as a more ethical, more sustainable, and ultimately more successful enterprise. Charlotte herself had blossomed. The tension that used to live permanently in her shoulders was gone, replaced by an easy confidence. She had found a rhythm that was entirely her own, balancing her board responsibilities with playdates, trips to the park, and the sticky-fingered joys of motherhood. She had created a world for her son that was safe, loving, and entirely free from the shadow of his father. Donovan had, for the most part, faded from their lives. He attended his court-mandated 1-hour supervised visits with Samuel once a week at a sterile facility in a nondescript office building. Reports from the supervisor noted he was often awkward, struggling to connect with a toddler he barely knew. He never caused a scene. He simply appeared, went through the motions, and disappeared again. Charlotte received brief formal email updates, which she read and archived without emotion. He was a footnote in her son's life, a biological fact rather than a parental presence. One dreary Tuesday afternoon in October, the kind of day where the sky is a uniform grey and a persistent drizzle dampens everything, Charlotte decided on a whim to take Samuel to a small independent bookstore with an attached cafe they both loved. It was their cozy refuge on rainy days. As Samuel happily smeared cookie crumbs all over a picture book about dinosaurs, Charlotte sipped her latte and watched him, a familiar warmth spreading through her chest. This was happiness. It wasn't grand or dramatic. It was quiet and real. The bell above the cafe door chimed, letting in a gust of damp air. She glanced up absently, and her heart gave a single, hard jolt. Standing there, shaking water from a worn trench coat, was Donovan. He was a ghost from a different era. The expensive tailor-made suit was gone, replaced by rumpled slacks and a coat that looked a size too big. The confident, world-conquering posture had vanished. His shoulders were slumped, his face thinner and etched with lines of weariness she'd never seen before. The aura of invincibility that had once surrounded him like a force field was gone. He looked like just another man trying to get out of the rain. He hadn't seen them. He ordered a black coffee, his voice so quiet she barely recognized it, and stood waiting by the counter, staring out at the rain-streaked street. For a moment, Charlotte considered gathering Samuel and slipping out unnoticed. What was there to say? But as she watched him, a man so thoroughly diminished, she felt not a spark of anger or a flicker of triumph. She felt only a strange, hollow pity. This was the man who had shattered her world, and this was what was left. He turned with his coffee, and his eyes scanned the small cafe. They landed on Samuel first, and a look of pained recognition crossed his face. Then his gaze lifted and met hers. For a long moment, they just stared at each other across the small room. The air crackled with the weight of everything unsaid between them. He looked like he might turn and flee, but instead he took a hesitant step toward their table. "Charlotte," he said. His voice was raspy. "Donovan," she replied, her own voice perfectly even. She placed a calm hand on Samuel's back, a subconscious gesture of protection. I didn't expect to see you here," he stammered, gesturing vaguely. "This isn't my usual." He trailed off. Of course it wasn't. His usual spots were exclusive clubs and five-star restaurants she hadn't set foot in for years. "We like the books," she said simply, unwilling to fill the awkward silence for him. He nodded, his eyes fixed on Samuel, who was now looking at him with a child's open curiosity. "He's gotten so big." "They tend to do that," Charlotte said, her tone polite but distant. An agonizing silence stretched between them. He seemed to be wrestling with himself, searching for words that wouldn't come. "Look, Charlotte, I know I have no right to ask you for anything. I know what I did." He finally looked at her, and for the first time, she saw not the arrogant narcissist or the cornered liar, but a man drowning in regret. "I lost everything. I deserved to. I get that now. I have a small consulting gig. I live in a one-bedroom in Queens. It's humbling." "I see," she said. "That's not why What I mean is, he struggled. The money, the company. I think about it. But what I really think about is him. I see him for an hour a week in that awful room with that woman watching us, and he doesn't know me. I'm just a stranger. I try to play with the blocks, and I missed it all. The first steps, the first words. I missed everything, because I was a fool." Tears welled in his eyes, and he swiped at them angrily. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't deserve that. I'm begging for a chance to be his father. Not just for an hour a week. Maybe I could take him to the park on a Saturday unsupervised, just for an hour. I just want him to know me. This was it. The one question she had always dreaded, the one plea she knew might one day come. The old Charlotte would have reacted with fury with a litany of his sins. But she was not the old Charlotte. She looked at Donovan at his desperation. Then she looked at her son, happy, secure, and innocent. Her only duty was to him. No, she said, her voice soft but absolute. The hope in his eyes died. Charlotte, please. No, she repeated, leaning forward slightly. A father isn't a playdate, Donovan. A father is the man who is there. He's there for the fevers at 3 a.m., for the scraped knees, for the boring Tuesday afternoons in the rain. He's the one who reads the same dinosaur book 50 times until he knows it by heart. You don't get to skip the work and show up for the highlight reel. That's not how this works. She saw the truth of her words land on him like a physical blow. But, she continued, and he looked up a sliver of hope, returning. You can continue with the supervised visits. Every single one. Don't be late. Don't cancel. Be present even when it's awkward. Be consistent. If after a full year of perfect attendance and positive reports from the supervisor, you can prove that you are a stable and reliable presence, then we can sit down with a family therapist and discuss the possibility of a next step. You won't earn it back with one grand emotional appeal. You will earn it minute by painstaking minute. You have to build a foundation. For him. He stared at her, the full weight of the task ahead of him, dawning. It was a mountain to climb. But it was also a path. It was more than he had. He slowly nodded, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a weary acceptance. Okay, he whispered. Okay, Charlotte. Thank you. He turned and walked away without another word, leaving his full cup of coffee on the counter. Charlotte watched him push the door open and disappear back into the grey, drizzling rain. She felt no victory, only the quiet, somber closing of a final chapter. She turned back to her son, who was looking up at her. "Who was that man, Mommy?" Samuel asked. Charlotte smoothed his hair back from his forehead, her heart aching with a love so fierce it almost hurt. "That was just a man from a long time ago. My sweet boy," she said, her voice full of warmth and truth. "Now what do you say we get another cookie?" He beamed, his world already shrinking back to the warm cafe, the beloved books, and his mother's smile. And in that moment, Charlotte knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. She had protected her son, not just from the man Donovan was, but for the man he might one day finally learn to be. That, my friends, is the story of Charlotte Sterling, a woman who walked into a hospital to have a baby and walked out a matriarch. It's a jaw-dropping tale of how the glossiest lives can hide the deepest secrets, and how a single arrogant mistake on social media can unravel an entire empire. Donovan Sterling thought his money and power made him untouchable, but he forgot to read the fine print on his own life. Charlotte didn't just get even. She reclaimed a future that was rightfully hers all along. What would you have done in her shoes? Could you have found that strength amidst such a devastating betrayal? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story of justice and resilience resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and most importantly, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next real-life drama.